Chapter 106. Ahab's Leg. The precipitating manner in which Captain Ahab had quitted the Samuel Enderby of London had not been unattended with some small violence to his own person. He had lighted with such energy upon the thwart of his boat that his ivory leg had received a half-splintering shock, and when, after gaining his own deck and his own pivot hole there, he so vehemently wheeled round with an urgent command to the steersman, it was as ever something about his not steering inflexibly enough. Then the already shaken ivory received such an additional twist and wrench that though it still remained entire and to all appearances lusty, yet Ahab did not deem it entirely trustworthy. And indeed it seemed small matter for wonder that for all his pervading mad recklessness, Ahab did at times give careful heed to the condition of that dead bone upon which he partly stood. For it had not been very long prior to the Peekquad sailing from Nantucket that he had been found one night lying prone upon the ground and insensible by some unknown and seemingly inexplicable unimaginable casualty, his ivory limb having been so violently displaced that it had stakewise smitten and all but pierced his groin. Nor was it without extreme difficulty that the agonizing wound was entirely curadition. Nor at the time had it failed to enter his monomaniac mind that all the anguish of that then present suffering was but the direct issue of a former woe. And he too plainly seemed to see that as the most poisonous reptile of the marsh perpetuates his kind, as inevitably as the sweetest songster of the grove, so equally with every felicity, all miserable events do naturally beget their like. Yea, more than equally, thought Ahab, since both the ancestry and posterity of grief go further than the ancestry and posterity of joy. For, not to hint of this, that it is an inference from certain canonic teachings, that while some natural enjoyments here shall have no children born to them for the other world, but on the contrary shall be followed by the joy childlessness of all hell's despair, whereas some guilty mortal miseries shall still fertilely beget to themselves an eternally progressive progeny of griefs beyond the jar avenue. Not at all to hint of this, there still seems an inequality in the deeper analysis of the thing. For thought Ahab, while even the highest earthly felicities have a certain unsignifying pettiness lurking in them, but at bottom all heart woes, a mystic significance, and in some men an archangelic grandeur, so do their diligent tracings out not belly the obvious deduction. To trail the genealogies of these high mortal miseries carries us at last among the sourceless primogenitors of the gods, so that in the face of all the glad haymaking suns and soft cymbaling round harvest moons, we must needs give in to this that the gods themselves are not forever glad. The ineffable sad birthmark in the brow of man is but the stamp of sorrow in the sirs. Unwittingly here a secret has been divulged which perhaps might more properly in set way have been disclosed before with many other particulars concerning Ahab always had it. Remained a mystery to some why it was that for a certain period both before and after the sailing of the Peekquad, he had hidden himself away with such grand llama-like exclusiveness, and for that one interval sought speechless refuge as it were among the marble senate of the dead. Captain Pell's brute reason for this thing appeared by no means adequate, though indeed, as touching all Ahab's deeper part, every revelation partook more of significant darkness than of explanatory light. But in the end, it all came out. This one matter did, at least saint that dire mishap was at the bottom of his temporary recluseness. And not only this, but to that ever-contracting dropping circle ashore, who for any reason possessed the privilege of a less band approach to him. To that timid circle the above-hinted casualty, remaining, as it did, moodily unaccounted for by Ahab, invested itself with terrors not entirely underived from the land of spirits and of whales, so that through their zeal for him they had all conspired so far as in them lay to muffle up the knowledge of this thing from others. And hence it was that not till a considerable interval had elapsed did it transpire upon the Peekquad's decks. But be all this as it may, Let the unseen ambiguous sign it in the air, or the vindictive princes and potentates of fire have to do or not with earthly Ahab. Yet in this present matter of his leg, he took plain practical procedures. He called the carpenter, and when that functionary appeared before him, he bade him without delay set about making a new leg, and directed the mates to see him supplied with all these studs and joists of jaw, ivory sperm whale, which had thus far been accumulated on the voyage, in order that a careful selection of the stoutest, clearest grain stuff might be secure addition. This done, the carpenter received orders to have the leg completed that night, and to provide all the fittings for it, independent of those pertaining to the distrusted one in use. Chapter 107. The Carpenter. Seat thyself sultanically among the moons of Saturn, and take high abstracted man alone, and he seems a wonder, a grandeur, and a woe. But from the same point take mankind in mass, and for the most part they seem a mob of unnecessary duplicates, both contemporary and hereditary. But most humble though he was, and far from furnishing an example of the high humane abstraction, the Peekquad's carpenter was no duplicate, hence he now comes in person on this stage. Like all seagoing ship carpenters, and more especially those belonging to whaling vessels, he was to a certain off-handed practical extent, alike experienced in numerous trades and callings collateral to his own, the carpenter's pursuit being the ancient and outbranching trunk of all those numerous handicrafts which more or less have to do with wood as an auxiliary material. But besides the application to him of the generic remark above, this carpenter of the Peekquad was singularly efficient in those thousand nameless mechanical emergencies continually recurring in a large ship upon a 3 or 4 years' voyage in univilized and farestant seas. For not to speak of his readiness in ordinary duties, repairing stove boats, sprung spars, reforming the shape of clumsy bladed oars, inserting bull's eyes in the deck, or new tree nails in the side planks, and other miscellaneous matters more directly pertaining to his special business. He was, moreover, unhesitatingly expert in all manner of conflicting aptitudes, both useful and capricious. The one grand stage where he enacted all his various parts, so manifold, was his vice bench, a long, rude, ponderous table furnished with several vices, of different sizes, and both of iron and of wood. At all times, except when whales were alongside, this bench was securely lashed athwart ships, against the rear of the try-works. A belaying pin is found too large to be easily inserted into its hole. The carpenter claps it into one of his ever-ready vices, and straightway files it smaller. A lost landard of strange plumage strays on board, and is made a captive. Out of clean-shaved rods of right whale bone and cross beams of sperm whale ivory, the carpenter makes a pagged-looking cage for it. An oarsman sprains his riceinth, the carpenter concocts a soothing lotion. Stubb longed for vermilion stars to be painted upon the blade of his every oar. Screwing each oar in his big vise of wood, the carpenter symmetrically supplies the constellation. A sailor takes a fancy to wear sharp bone earrings. The carpenter drills his ears. Another has a toothache. The carpenter out pincers, and clapping one hand upon his bench, bids him be seated there. But the poor fellow unmanageably winces under the unconcluded operation. Whirling round the handle of his wooden vice, the carpenter signs him to clap his jaw in that if he would have him draw the tooth. Thus this carpenter was prepared at all points, and alike indifferent, and without respect in all. Teeth he accounted bits of ivory, heads he deemed but top blocks, men themselves he lightly held for capstans. But while now, upon so wide a field, thus variously accomplished, and with such liveless of expertness in him, too, all this would seem to argue some uncommon vivacity of intelligence. But not precisely so. For nothing was this man more remarkable than for a certain impersonal stolidity, as it were, impersonal, I say, for it so shaded off into the surrounding infinite of things, that it seemed one with the general stality discernible in the whole visible world, which while pauselessly active in uncounted modes, still eternally holds its peace and ignores you, though you dig foundations for cathedrals. Yet was this half-horrible stolidity in him, involving too, as it appeared, an all-ramifying heartlessness. Yet was it oddly dashed at times, with an old crutch-like antediluvian wheezing humorousness, not unstreaked now and then with a certain grizzled wittiness, such as might have served to pass the time during the midnight watch on the bearded folk of Noah's Ark. Was it that this old carpenter had been a lifelong wanderer, whose much rolling to and fro not only had gathered no moss, but what is more had rubbed off whatever small outward clings might have originally pertained to him? He was a stripped abstract, an unfractioned integral, uncompromised as a newborn babe, living without premeditated reference to this world or the next. You might almost say that this strange uncompromisedness in him involved a sort of unintelligence. For in his numerous trades he did not seem to work so much by reason or by instinct or simply because he had been tutored to it, or by any intermixture of all these, even or uneven, but merely by a kind of deaf and dumb spontaneous literal process. He was a pure manipulator. His brain, if he had ever had one, must have early oozed along into the muscles of his fingers. He was like one of those unreasoning, but still highly useful multum in parvo Sheffield contrivances, assuming the exterior, though a little swelled, of a common pocket knife, but containing not only blades of various sizes, but also screwdrivers, corkscrews, tweezers, awls, pins, rulers, nail filers, countersinkers. So if his superiors wanted to use the carpenter for a screwdriver, all they had to do was to open that part of him, and the screw was fast, or if for tweezers, take him up by the legs, and there they were. Yet, as previously hinted, this omni-tooled open-shot carpenter was, after all, no mere machine of an automaton. If he did not have a common soul in him, he had a subtle something that somehow anomalously did its duty. What that was, whether essence of quicks or a few drops of hartshorn, there was no telling. But there it was, and there it had abided for now some 60 years or more. And it was this same unaccountable cunning life principle in him. This it was that kept him a great part of the time soliloquizing, but only like an unreasoning wheel which also hummingly soliloquizes. Or rather his body was a sentry box, and this soliloquizer on guard there, and talking all the time to keep himself awake. Chapter 108. Ahab and the Carpenter. The deck. First night watch. Carpenter standing before his vice bench, and by the light of 2 lanterns, busily filing the ivory joist for the leg, which joist is firmly fixed in the vice. Slabs of ivory, leather straps, pads, screws, and various tools of all sorts lying about the bench. Forward the red flame of the forge is seen, where the blacksmith is at work. Drat the file, and drought the bone. That is hard, which should be soft, and that is soft, which should be hard. So we go, who file old jaws and shin bones. Let's try another. Ah, now this works better. Sneezes. Hello. This bone dust is sneezes. Why, it sneezes. Yes, it sneezes. Bless my soul. It won't let me speak. That is what an old fellow gets now for working in dead lumber. Saw a live tree, and you don't get this. Do Saint amputate a live bone, and you don't get it. Sneezes. Come, come, you old smut. There, bear a hand, and let's have that ferrule and buckle screw. I'll be ready for them presently. Lucky now, sneezes. There's no knee joint to make. That might puzzle a little, but a mere shin bone. Why, it's as easy as making hop poles. Only I should like to put a good finish on. Time. If I but only had the time, I could turn him out as needle-leg now as ever. Sneezes, scrape to a lady in a parlor. Those buckskin legs and calves of legs I've seen in shop windows wouldn't compare at all. They soak water, they do, and of course get rheumatic and have to be doctored. Sneezes with washes and lotions, just like live legs. Fair. Before I saw it off. Now I must call his old mobile ship, and see whether the length will be all right. Too short if anything, I guess. Huh, that's the heel. We are in luck. Here he comes. Or it's somebody else, that's certain. Ahab advancing. During the ensuing scene, the carpenter continues sneezing at times. Well, man-maker, just in time, sir. If the captain pleases, I will now mark the length. Let me measure, sir. Measured for a leg. Good. Well, it's not the first time. About it. There. Keep thy finger on it. This is a cogent vice thou hast here, carpenter. Let me feel its grip once. So it does pinch some. Oh, sir, it will break bones. Beware. Beware. No fear. I like a good grip. I like to feel something in this slippery world that can hold man. What's Prometheus about there? The blacksmith. I mean, what's he about? He must be forging the buckle screw, sir. Now, right. It's a partnership. He supplies the muscle part. He makes a fierce red flame there. Sir, he must have the white heat for this kind of fine work. So he must, I do deem it now a most meaning thing that this old Greek Prometheus, who made men, they say, should have been a blacksmith and animated them with fire. For what's made in fire must properly belong to fire, and so hell's probable. How the soot flies. This must be the remainder the Greek made the Africans of. Carpenter, when he's through with that buckle, tell him to forge a pair of steel shoulder blades. There is a peddler aboard with a crushing pack. Sir, hold. While Prometheus is about it, I'll order a complete man after a desirable pattern. Imprimis 50 feet high in his socks. Then chest modeled after the Thames Tunnel. Then legs with roots to him to stay in one place. Then arms 3 feet through the rice ain't no hard at all. Brass forehead and about 1/4 of an acre of fine brains. And let me see. Shall I order eyes to see outwards? No, but put a skylight on top of his head to illuminate inwards. There, take the order and away. Now, what's he speaking about, and who is he speaking to? I should like to know. Shall I keep standing here? Aside. It is but in different architecture to make a blind dome. Here's one. No. I must have a lantern. Ho, that's it. Here are 2, sir. One will serve my turn. What art thou thrusting that thief-catcher into my face for, man? Thrusted light is worse than presented pistols. I thought, sir, that you spoke to Carpenter. Carpenter? Why, that's but a very tidy, and I may say an extremely gentlemanlike sort of business thou art in here, Carpenter. Or would thou rather work in clay, sir? Clay? Clay, sir? That's mud. We leave clay to ditchers, sir. The fellow's impious. What art thou sneezing about? A bone is rather dusty, sir. Take the hint, then, and when thou art dead, never bury thyself under living people's noses, sir. I guess so. Yes, dear. Look, Carpenter, I dare say thou callest thyself a right good workmanlike workman, eh? Well then, will it speak thoroughly well for thy work? If, when I come to mount this leg, thou makest, I shall nevertheless feel another leg in the same identical place with it. That is, Carpenter, my old lost leg, the flesh and blood one, I mean. Can thou not drive that old Adam away? Truly, sir, I begin to understand somewhat now. Yes, I have heard something curious on that score, sir, how a dismastered man never entirely loses the feeling of his old spar, but it will be still pricking him at times. May I humbly ask if it really be so, sir? It is, man. Look, put thy live leg here in the place where mine once was. So now here is only one distinct leg to the eye, yet 2 to the soul. Where thou feelest tingling life, there exactly there to a hair do I. Is it a riddle? I should humbly call it a poser, sir. Then how dost thou know that some entire living thinking thing may not be invisibly and uninterpenetratingly standing precisely where thou now standest? In standing there in thy spite in thy most solitary hours, then dost thou not fear eavesdroppers? Hold, don't speak. And if I still feel the smart of my crushed leg, though it be now so long dissolved, then why mayest not thou, Carpenter, feel the fiery pains of hell forever and without a body? Good Lord. Truly, sir, if it comes to that, I must calculate over again. I think I didn't carry a small figure, sir. Look ye, pudding head should never grant premises. How long before the leg is done? Perhaps an hour, sir. Bungle away at it then, and bring it to me. Turns to go. Oh, life! Here I am, proud as a Greek god, and yet standing dead to this blockhead for a bone to stand on. Cursed be that mortal and turrend indebtedness, which will not do away with ledgers. I would be free as air, and I'm down in the whole world's books. I am so rich I could have given bid for bid with the wealthiest Taurians at the auction of the Roman Empire, which was the world's. And yet I owe for the flesh and the tongue I brag with. By heavens, I'll get a crucible, and into it, and dissolve myself down to one small compendious vertebra. So Carpenter resuming his work. Well, well, well. Stubb knows him best of all. And Stubb always says he's queer. Says nothing but that one sufficient little word. Queer. He's queer, says Stubb. He's queer. 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 And keeps dinning it into Mr. Starbucks all the time. Queer, sir. Queer. Queer. Very queer. And here's his leg. Yes, now that I think of it, here's his bedfellow. He has a stick of whale's jawbone for a wife. And this is his leg. He'll stand on this. What was that now about one leg standing in 3 places, and all the 3 places standing in one hell? How was that? Oh, I don't wonder. He looked so scornful at me. I'm a sort of strange-a-thoughted sometimes, they say, but that's only haphazard-like. Then a short little old body like me should never undertake to wade out into deep waters with tall heron-built captains. The water chucks you under the chin pretty quick, and there's a great cry for lifeboats. And here's the heron's leg, long and slim, sure enough. Now, for most folks, one pair of legs lasts a lifetime. And that must be because they use them mercifully as a tender-hearted old lady uses her roly-poly old coach horses. But Ahab, oh, he's a hard driver. Look, driven one leg to death and spaven the other for life, and now wears out bone legs by the cord. Hello there, you smut. Bear a hand there with those screws, and let's finish it before the resurrection fellow comes a-calling with his horn for all legs. True or false, as brewery men go around collecting old beer barrels to fill them up again. What a leg this is. It looks like a real live leg filed down to nothing but the core. He'll be standing on this tomorrow. He'll be taking altitudes on it. Hello. I almost forgot the little oval slate, smoothed ivory where he figures up the latitude. So chisel, file, and sandpaper now. Chapter 109. Ahab and Starbucks in the cabin. According to usage, they were pumping the ship the next morning, and lo, no inconsiderable oil came up with the water. The casks below must have sprung a bad leak. Much concern was shown, and Starbucks went down into the cabin to report this unfavorable affair. Footnote: in sperm whalemen with any considerable quantity of oil on board, it is a regular semi-weekly duty to conduct a hose into the hold and drench the casks with seawater, which afterwards at varying intervals is removed by the ship's pumps. Hereby the casks are sought to be kept damply tight, while by the changed character of the withdrawn water, the mariners readily detect any serious leakage in the precious cargo. End of footnote. Now from the south and west the Peekquad was drawing nigh to Formosa and the Bashi Isles, between which lies one of the tropical outlets from the China waters into the Pacific. And so Starbucks found Ahab with a general chart of the Oriental archipelagos spread before him, and another separate one representing the long eastern coasts of the Japanese islands, Nephon, Matsumi, and Shikoku, with his snow-white new ivory leg braced against the screwed leg of his table, and with a long pruning hook of a jackknife in his hand. The wondrous old man, with his back to the gangway door, was wrinkling his brow and tracing his old courses again. Who's there? Hearing the footstep at the door, but not turning round to it. On deck, begone. Captain Ahab mistakes. It is I. The oil in the hold is leaking, sir. We must up now that we are nearing Japan. Heave to here for a week to tinker a parcel of old hoops. Either do that, sir, or waste in one day more oil than we may make good in a year. What we come 20, me to get is worth saving, sir. So it is. So it is if we get it. I was speaking of the oil in the hold, sir. And I was not speaking or thinking of that at all. Begone. Let it leak. I'm all a leak myself. I leaks and leaks. Not only full of leaky casks, but those leaky casks are in a leaky ship. And that's a far worse plight than the Peekquad's man. Yet I don't stop to plug my leak, or who can find it in the deep-loaded hull, or how hope to plug it, even if found in this life's howling gale. Starbucks, I'll not have the Burton's hoist edition. What will the owners say, sir? Let the owners stand on Nantucket Beach and out yell the typhoons. What cares, Ahab? Owners, owners, thou art always praying to me, Starbucks, about those miserly owners, as if the owners were my conscience. But look ye, the only real owner of anything is its commander, and hark ye, my conscience is in this ship's keel, on deck. Captain Ahab, said the reening mate, moving further into the cabin with a daring so strangely respectful and cautious that it almost seemed not only every way seeking to avoid the slightest outward manifestation of itself, but within also seemed more than half distrustful of itself. A better man than I might well pass over in thee, what he would quickly enough resent in a younger man. Ay, and in a happier Captain Ahab. Devils, dost thou then so much as dare to critically think of me? On deck? Nay, sir, not yet. I do entreat, and I do dare, sir, to be forbearing. Shall we not understand each other better than hitherto, Captain Ahab? Ahab seized a loaded musket from the rack forming part of most South Seaman's cabin furniture, and pointing it towards Starbucks, exclaimed, There is one God that is Lord over the earth, and one captain that is Lord over the Peekquad on deck. For an instant, in the flashing eyes of the mate and his fiery cheeks, you would have almost thought that he had really received the blaze of the leveled tube. But mastering his emotion, he half calmly rose, and as he quitted the cabin, paused for an instant, and said, Thou hast outraged, not insulted me, sir. But for that I ask thee not to beware of Starbucks. Thou wouldst but laugh. But let Ahab beware of Ahab. Beware of thyself, old man. He waxes brave, but nevertheless obeys. Most careful bravery that, murmured Ahab as Starbucks' disappear edition. What's that? He said, Ahab, beware of Ahab. There's something there. Then unconsciously using the musket for a staff with an iron brow, he paced to and fro in the little cabin. But presently the thick pleats of his forehead relaxed, and returning the gun to the rack, he went on deck. Thou art but too good a fellow, Starbucks, he said lowly to the mate. Then raising his voice to the crew, furl the taggallant sails, and close reef the topsails for an A-fort back the mainyard up Burton and break out in the main hold. It were perhaps vain to surmise exactly why it was that, as respecting Starbucks, Ahab thus acted. It may have been a flash of honesty in him, or a mere credential policy which, under the circumstance, imperiously forbade the slightest symptom of open dissection, however transient, in the important chief officer of his ship. Chapter 110. Quiqu in his coffin. Upon searching, it was found that the casks last struck into the hold were perfectly sound, and that the leak must be further off. So, it being calm weather, they broke out deeper and deeper, disturbing the slumbers of the huge ground tier butts, and from that black midnight, sending those gigantic moles into the daylight above. So deep did they go, and so ancient and corroded and weedy the aspect of the lowermost puncheons that you almost looked next for some moldy cornerstone cask containing coins of Captain Noah, with copies of the posted placards vainly warning the infatuated old world from the flood. Tiers after tiers, too, of water and bread and beef and shooks of staves and iron bundles of hoops were hoisted out, till at last the piled decks were hard to get about, and the hollow hull echoed underfoot, as if you were treading over empty catacombs, and reeled and rolled in the sea like an air-frayed demijohn. Top-heavy was the ship as a dinnerless student with all Aristotle in his head. What was it that the typhoons did not visit them then? Now at this time it was that my poor pagan companion and fast bosom friend Quake was seized with a fever which brought him nigh to his endless end. Be it said that in this vocation of whaling secures are unknown. Dignity and danger go hand in hand till you get to be captain. The higher you rise, the harder you toil. So with poor Quake, who as harpooner must not only face all the rage of the living whale, but as we have elsewhere seen, mount his dead back in a rolling sea, and finally descend into the gloom of the hold, and bitterly sweating all day in that subterranean confinement, resolutely manhandle the clumsiest casks, and see to their stowage. To be short, among whalemen, the harpooners are the holders, so-called edition poor K. When the ship was about half disemboweled, you should have stooped over the hatchway, and peered down upon him there, where, stripped to his woolen drawers, the tattooed savage was crawling about amid that dampness and slime like a green-spotted lizard at the bottom of a well. And a well, or an ice-house, it somehow proved to him, poor pagan, where, strange to say, for all the heat of his sweatings, he caught a terrible chill which lapsed into a fever, labor, and at last, after some days' suffering, laid him in his hammock, close to the very sill of the door of death. How he wasted and wasted away in those few long, lingering days, till there seemed but little left of him but his frame and tattooing. But as all else in him thinned, and his cheekbones grew sharper, his eyes nevertheless seemed growing fuller and fuller. They became of a strange softness of luster and mildly, but deeply looked out at you there from his sickness. A wondrous testimony to that immortal health in him, which could not die or be weak in addition, and like circles on the water, which as they grow fainter expand. So his eyes seemed rounding and rounding like the rings of eternity. An awe that cannot be named would steal over you as you sat by the side of this waning savage and saw as strange things in his face as any beheld who were bystanders when Zoroaster, the edition, for whatever is truly wondrous and fearful in man never yet was put into words or books. And the drawing near of death, which alike levels all, alike impresses all with a last revelation, which only an author from the dead could adequately tell. So that, let us say it again, no dying Chaldee or Greek had higher and holier thoughts than those whose mysterious shades you saw creeping over the face of poor Quem. And the rolling sea seemed gently rocking him to his final rest, and the ocean's invisible flood tide lifted him higher and higher towards his destined heaven. Not a man of the crew, but gave him up. And as for Quake himself, what he thought of the case was forcibly shown. By a curious favor, he asked edition he called, one to him in the gray morning watch when the day was just breaking, and taking his hand said that while in Nantucket he had chanced to see certain little canoes of dark wood like the rich warwood of his native isle, and upon inquiry he had learned that all whalemen who died in Nantucket were laid in those same dark canoes, and that the fancy of being so laid had much pleased him. For it was not unlike the custom of his own race, who after embalming a dead warrior stretched him out in his canoe, and so left him to be floated away to the starry archipelagos. For not only do they believe that the stars are, but that far beyond all visible horizons, their own mild, uncontented seas interflow with the blue heavens, and so form the white breakers of the Milky Way. He added that he shuddered at the thought of being buried in his hammock according to the usual sea custom, tossed like something vile to the death-devouring sharks. No, he desired a canoe like those of Nantucket, all the more congenial to him, being a whaleman, that like a whaleboat, these coffin canoes were without a keel, though that involved but uncertain steering and much leeway down the dim ages. Now when this strange circumstance was made known aft, the carpenter was at once commanded to do Quiqu's bidding, whatever it might include. There was some heathenish coffin-cold old lumber aboard, which upon a long previous voyage had been cut from the aboriginal groves of the Lackaday Islands. And from these dark planks the coffin was recommended to be made. No sooner was the carpenter apprised of the order than taking his rule, he forthwith, with all the indifferent promptitude of his character, proceeded into the folks and took quiqu's measure with great accuracy, regularly chalking quiqu's person as he shifted the rule. "Ah, poor fellow, he'll have to die now," ejaculated the Long Island sailor. Going to his vice bench, the carpenter, for convenience sake and general reference, now transferringly measured on it the exact length the coffin was to be, and then made the transfer permanent by cutting 2 notches at its extremities. This done, he marshaled the planks and his tools, and to work. When the last nail was driven, and the lid duly planed and fitted, he lightly shouldered the coffin, and went forward with it, inquiring whether they were ready for it yet in that direction. Overhearing the indignant but half-humorous cries with which the people on deck began to drive the coffin away, quiqu, to everyone's consternation, commanded that the thing should be instantly brought to him. Nor was there any denying him, seeing that of all mortals, some dying men are the most tyrannical, and certainly, since they will shortly trouble us so little forevermore, the poor fellows ought to be in dulgedition. Leaning over in his hammock, quiqu long regarded the coffin with an attentive eye. He then called for his harpoon and had the wooden stock drawn from it, and then had the iron part placed in the coffin along with one of the paddles of his boat. All by his own requ established also. Biscuits were then ranged round the sides within, a flask of fresh water was placed at the head, and a small bag of woody earth scraped up in the hold at the foot, and a piece of sailcloth being rolled up for a pillow, Cade to be lifted into his final bed, that he might make trial of its comforts, if any it had. He lay without moving a few minutes, then told one to go to his bag and bring out his little god Yojo. Then, crossing his arms on his breast with Yojo between, he called for the coffin lid, hatch he called it, to be placed over him. The head part turned over with a leather hinge, and there lay we in his coffin, with little but his composed countenance in view. It will do. It is easy," he murmured at last, and signed to be replaced in his hammock. But ere this was done, Pip, who had been slightly hovering nearby all this while, drew nigh to him where he lay, and with soft sobbings took him by the hand, in the other holding his tambourine. "Poor rover, will you never have done with all this weary roving? Where go you now? But if the currents carry you to those sweet Antilles, where the beaches are only beat with waterlies, will you do one little errand for me? Seek out one Pip who's now been missing long. I think he's in those far Antilles. If you find him, then comfort him, for he must be very sad. For look, he's left his tambourine behind. I found it. Rig-a-dig. Now quiqu, and I'll beat your dying march." "I have heard," murmured Starbucks, gazing down the scuttle, "that in violent fevers men, all ignorance, have talked in ancient tongues, and that when the mystery is probed, it turns out always that in their wholly forgotten childhood those ancient tongues had been really spoken in their hearing by some lofty scholars. So to my fond faith poor Pith in this strange sweetness of his lunacy brings heavenly vouchers of all our heavenly homes. Where learned he that? But there ark he speaks again, but more wildly now. Form 2 and 2. Let's make a general of him. Oh, where's his harpoon? Lay it across here. Rig-a-dig-dig. Huzzah! Throw for a gamecock now to sit upon his head and crow. Quiqu game. Mind you that. Quiqu game. Take you good heed of that. Quiqu game. I say game. But base little Pip. He died a coward. Died all a shiver. Out upon Pip. Harkee. If you find Pip, tell all the Antilles he's a runaway. A coward. A coward. A coward. Tell them he jumped from a whaleboat. I'd never beat my tambourine over base Pip and hail him general if he were once more dying here. No, no. Shame upon all cowards. Shame upon them. Let him go drown like Pip that jumped from a whaleboat. Shame. Shame. During all this, quiqu lay with closed eyes as if in a dream. Pip was led away, and the sick man was replaced in his hammock. But now that he had apparently made every preparation for death, now that his coffin was proved a good fit, Quiqu suddenly rallied edition. Soon there seemed no need of the carpenter's box, and thereupon, when some expressed their delighted surprise, he in substance said that the cause of his sudden convalescence was this. At a critical moment, he had just recalled a little beauty ashore which he was leaving undone, and therefore had changed his mind about dying. He could not die, yet he averred edition. They asked him then whether to live or die was a matter of his own sovereign will and pleasure. He answered certainly. In a word, it was Queequeg's conceit that if a man made up his mind to live, mere sickness could not kill him. Nothing but a whale or a gale or some violent, ungovernable, unintelligent destroyer of that sort. Now there is this noteworthy difference between savage and civilized, that while a sick civilized man may be 6 months convulsing, generally speaking a sick savage is almost half well again in a day. So in good time my Quiqu gained strength, and at length, after sitting on the windlass for a few indolent days, but eating with a vigorous appetite, he suddenly leaped to his feet, threw out his arms and legs, gave himself a good stretching, yawned a little bit, and then, springing into the head of his hoisted boat, and poisoning a harpoon, pronounced himself fit for a fight. With a wild whimsiness he now used his coffin for a sea chest, and emptying into it his canvas bag of clothes, set them in order there. Many spare hours he spent in carving the lid with all manner of grotesque figures and drawings, and it seemed that hereby he was striving in his rude way to copy parts of the twisted tattooing on his body. And this tattooing had been the work of a departed prophet and seer on his island, who by those hieroglyphic marks had written out on his body a complete theory of the heavens and the earth and a mystical treatise on the art of attaining truth. So that Quiqu in his own proper person was a riddle to unfold, a wondrous work in one volume, but whose mysteries not even himself could read, though his own live heart beat against them. And these mysteries were therefore destined in the end to moulder away with the living parchment whereon they were inscribed, and so be unsolved to the saint, and this thought it must have been which suggested to Ahab that wild exclamation of his when one morning, turning away from surveying poor quiqu, "O devilish tantalization of the gods!" Chapter 111. The Pacific. When gliding by the Boschi Isles, we emerged at last upon the great South Sea. Were it not for other things, I could have greeted my dear Pacific with uncounted thanks, for now the long supplication of my youth was answered. That serene ocean rolled eastwards from me 1,000 leagues of blue. There is one knows not what sweet mystery about this sea, whose gentle, awful stirring seem to speak of some hidden soul beneath, like those fabled undulations of the Ephesian sod. Over the buried evangelist St. John, and meet it is that over these sea pastures, wide rolling watery prairies and potters' fields of all 4 continents, the waves should rise and fall, and ebb and flow unceasingly. For here millions of mixed shades and shadows, drowned dreams, somnambulisms, rearies, all that we call lives and souls lie dreaming, dreaming still, tossing like slumberers in their beeditors the ever-rolling waves, but made so by their restlessness. To any meditative Magian rover, this serene Pacific, once beheld, must ever after be the sea of his adoption. It rolls the midmost waters of the world, the Indian Ocean and Atlantic being, but its armis the same waves wash the moles of the new-built Californian towns, but yesterday planted by the recentest race of men, and leave the faded but still gorgeous skirts of Asiatic lands older than Abraham, while all between float milky ways of coral isles, and low-lying, endless, unknown archipelagos, and impenetrable Japans. Thus this mysterious divine Pacific zones the world's whole bulk about, makes all coasts one bay to it seems the tide-beating heart of earth lifted by those eternal swells you needs. Must own the seductive god bowing your head to Pan, but few thoughts of Pan stirred Ahab's brain, as standing like an iron statue at his accustomed place beside the mizzen rigging with one nostril he unthinking ly snuffed the sugary musk from the Bachelor Isles. in whose sweet woods mild lovers must be walking, and with the other consciously inhaled the salt breath of the new-found sea, that sea in which the hated white whale must even then be swimming. Launched at length upon these almost final waters, and gliding towards the Japanese cruising ground, the old man's purpose intensified itself. His firm lips met like the lips of a vice. The delta of his forehead's veins swelled like overladen brooks. In his very sleep, his ringing cry ran through the vaulted hull. Stern all the white whale spouts thick blood. Chapter 112. The Blacksmith. Availing himself of the mild summer cool weather that now reigned in these latitudes, and in preparation for the peculiarly active pursuit shortly to be anticipated, Perth, the begrimed, blistered old blacksmith, had not removed his portable forge to the hold again after concluding his contributo work for Ahab's leg, but still retained it on deck, fast lashed to ring bolts by the foremast, being now almost incessantly invoked by the headsmen and harpooners and bowsmen to do some little job for them, altering or repairing or new shaping their various weapons and boat furniture. Often he would be surrounded by an eager circle, all waiting to be served, holding boat spades, pike heads, harpoons, and lances, and jealously watching his every movement as he toiled. Nevertheless, this old man's was a patient hammer wielded by a patient Arum. No murmur, no impatience, no petulance did come from him. Silent, slow, and solemn, bowing over still further his chronically broken back, he toiled away, as if toil were life itself, and the heavy beating of his hammer, the heavy beating of his heart. And so it was, most miserable. A peculiar walk in this old man, a certain slight but painful appearing yawing in his gait, had at an early period of the voyage excited the curiosity of the mariners, and to the importunity of their persisted questionings he had finally given in. So it came to pass that everyone now knew the shameful story of his wretched fate. Belated and not innocently, one bitter winter's midnight on the road running between two country towns, the blacksmith half stupidly felt the deadly numbness stealing over him, and sought refuge in a leaning, dilapidated barn. The issue was the loss of the extremities of both feet. Out of this revelation, part by part, at last came out the four acts of the gladness and the one long, and as yet uncatastrophed fifth act of the grief of his life's drama. He was an old man who at the age of nearly 60 had postponedly encountered that thing in sorrow's technicals called ruin. He had been an artisan of famed excellence and with plenty to do, owned a house and garden, embraced a youthful daughter-like loving wife and 3 blithe ruddy children. Every Sunday went to a cheerful-looking church planted in a grove. But one night under cover of darkness, and further concealed in a most cunning disguisement, a desperate burglar slid into his happy home and robbed them all of everything. And darker yet to tell, the blacksmith himself did ignorantly conduct this burglar into his family's heart. It was the bottle conjurer. Upon the opening of that fatal cork, forth flew the fiend, and shriveled up his home. Now, for prudent, most wise, and economic reasons, the blacksmith shop was in the basement of his dwelling, but with a separate entrance to it, so that always had the young and loving healthy wife listened with no unhappy nervousness, but with vigorous pleasure to the stout ringing of her young armed old husband's hammer, whose reverberations, muffled by passing through the floors and walls, came up to her not unsweetly in her nursery. And so to stout labor's iron lully, the blacksmith's infants were rocked to slumber. Oh, woe on woe! O death, why canst thou not sometimes be timely? Hast thou taken this old blacksmith to thyself ere his full ruin came upon him? Then had the young widow had a delicious grief, and her orphans a truly venerable, legendary sire to dream of in their after years, and all of them a caring competency. But death plucked down some virtuous elder brother on whose whistling daily toil solely hung the responsibilities of some other family, and left the worse than useless old man standing, till the hideous rot of life should make him easier to harvestablish. Why tell the whole? The blows of the basement hammer every day grew more and more between, and each blow every day grew fainter than the saint. The wife sat frozen at the window with tearless eyes, glitteringly gazing into the weeping faces of her children. The bellows fell, the forge choked up with cinders. The house was sold. The mother dived down into the long churchyard grass. Her children twice followed her thither, and the houseless, familyless old man staggered off a vagabond in crape, his every woe unreverenced, his gray head a scorn to flax and curls. Death seems the only desirable sequel for a career like this. But death is only a launching into the region of the strange untradition. It is but the first salutation to the possibilities of the immense remote. The wild, the watery, the unsuredition, therefore, to the death-longing eyes of such men, who still have left in them some interior compunctions against suicide. Does the all-contributed and all-receptive ocean alluringly spread forth his whole plain of unimaginable taking terrors and wonderful new life adventures? And from the hearts of infinite Pacifics, the thousand mermaids sing to them. Come hither, broken-heart edition. Here is another life without the guilt of intermediate death. Here are wonders supernatural without dying for them. Come hither, bury thyself in a life which to your now equally abhorred and abhorring landed world is more oblivious than death. Come hither, put up thy gravestone too within the churchyard, and come hither till we marry thee. Hearkening to these voices, east and west, by early sunrise, and by fall of eve, the blacksmith's soul responded, I come. And so Perth went away. Chapter 113. The Forge, with matted beard and swathed in a bristling sharkskin apron. About midday, Perth was standing between his forge and anvil, the latter placed upon an ironwood log, with one hand holding a pike head in the coals, and with the other at his forge's lungs, when Captain Ahab came along, carrying in his hand a small, rusty-looking leather bag. While yet a little distance from the forge, moody Ahab paused, till at last Perth, withdrawing his iron from the fire, began hammering it upon the anvil. The red mass sending off the sparks in thick hovering flights, some of which flew close to Ahab. Are these thy mother Carrie's chickens, Perth? They are always flying in thy wake. Birds of good omen, too, but not to all. Look here, they burn. But thou livest among them without a scorch. Because I am scorched all over, Captain Ahab, answered Perth, resting for a moment on his hammer. I am past scorching. Not easily canst thou scorch a scar. Well, no more. Thy shrunk voice sounds too calmly, sanely woeful to me. In no paradise myself. I am impatient of all misery and others that is not mad. Thou shouldst go mad, blacksmith, say, why dost thou not go mad? How canst thou endure without being mad? Do the heavens yet hate thee that thou canst not go mad? What thou making there? Welding an old pike head, sir, there were seams and dents in it. And thou make it all smooth again, blacksmith, after such hard usage as it had? I think so, sir. And I suppose thou can smooth almost any seams and dents. Never mind how hard the metal, blacksmith. Sir, I think I can. All seams and dents but one. Look you here then, cried Ahab, passionately advancing and leaning with both hands on Perth's shoulders. Look you here. Here. Can you smooth out a seam like this, blacksmith? Sweeping one hand across his ribbed brow. If thou couldst, blacksmith, glad enough would I lay my head upon thy anvil and feel thy heaviest hammer between my eyes. Answer, canst thou smooth this seam? Oh, that is the one, sir, said I. Not all seams and dents but one. Aye, blacksmith, it is the one, aye, man. It is unsewable. For though thou only seest it here in my flesh, it is worked down into the bone of my skull. That is all wrinkles. But away with child's play. No more gaffs and pikes today. Look you here, jingling the leather bag as if it were full of gold coins. I too want a harpoon made, one that 1,000 yoke of fiends could not part Perth. Something that will stick in a whale like his own fin bone. There's the stuff. Flinging the pouch upon the anvil. Look ye, blacksmith. These are the gathered nail stubs of the steel shoes of racing horses. Horseshoe stubs, sir. Why, Captain Ahab, thou hast there then the best and stubbornest stuff we blacksmiths ever work. I know it, old man. These stubs will weld together like glue from the melted bones of murderers. Quick, forge me the harpoon, and forge me first 12 rods for its shank. Then wind and twist and hammer these 12 together like the yarns and strands of a tow line. Quick, I'll blow the fire. When at last the 12 rods were made, Ahab tried them one by spiraling them with his own hand round a long, heavy iron lieutenant a flaw, rejecting the last one. Work that over again, Perth. This done, Perth was about to begin welding the 12 into one, when Ahab stayed his hand and said he would weld his own iron. As then, with regular gasping hems, he hammered on the anvil, Perth passing to him the glowing rods, one after the other, and the hard-pressed forge shooting up its intense straight flame. The Parsee passed silently, and bowing over his head towards the fire, seemed invoking some curse or some blessing on the toil. But as Ahab looked up, he slid aside. What's that bunch of lucifers dodging about? Therefore, muttered Stubb, looking on from the folks. That Parsee smells fire like a fusee, and smells of it himself like a hot musket's powder pan. At last the shank, in one complete rod, received its final heat, and as Perth, to temper it, plunged it all hissing into the cask of water nearby, the scalding steam shot up into Ahab's bent face. Thou brand me, Perth? Wincing for a moment with the pain. Have I been but forging my own branding iron? Then pray God not that. Yet I fear something, Captain Ahab. Is not this harpoon for the white whale, or the white fiend? But now for the barbs. Thou must make them thyself, man. Here are my razors, the best of steel. Here, and make the barb sharp as the needle sleet of the icy sea. For a moment the old blacksmith eyed the razors as though he would fain not use them. Take them, man. I have no need for them, for I now neither shave, suck, nor pray till. But here to work. Fashioned at last into an arrowy shape and welded by Perth to the shank, the steel soon pointed the end of the iron. And as the blacksmith was about giving the barbs their final heat prior to tempering them, he cried to Ahab to place the water cask near. No water for that. I want it of the true death temper. Ahoy there, Tashago Kikadu. What say you pagans? Will you give me as much blood as will cover this barb? Holding it high up, a cluster of dark nods replied, yes. 3 punctures were made in the heathen flesh, and the white whale's barbs were then temper edition. Ago, non baptizo enomi, deliriously howled Ahab as the malignant iron scorchingly devoured the baptismal blood. Now mustering the spare poles from below, and selecting one of hickory with the bark still investing it, Ahab fitted the end to the socket of the iron. A coil of new tow wine was then unwound, and some fathoms of it taken to the windlass and stretched to a great tension, pressing his foot upon it till the rope hummed like a harp string. Then eagerly bending over it, and seeing no strandings, Ahab exclaimed, Good, and now for the seizings. At one extremity the rope was unstranded, and the separate spread yarns were all braided and woven round the socket of the harpoon. The pole was then driven hard up into the socket. From the lower end, the rope was traced halfway along the pole's length and firmly secured so with interwistings of twine. This done, pole, iron, and rope like the 3 fates remained inseparable, and Ahab moodily stalked away with the weapon, the sound of his ivory leg, and the sound of the hickory pole both hollowy ringing along every plank. But ere he entered his cabin, light, unnatural, half bantering, yet most piteous sound was heard. Oh, Pip, thy wretched laugh, thy idle but unresting eye, all thy strange mummies not unmeaningly blended with the black tragedy of the melancholy ship, and mocked it. Chapter 114. The Gilder. Penetrating further and further into the heart of the Japanese cruising ground, The Peekquad was soon all astir in the fishery. Often in mild, pleasant weather for 12, 15, 18, and 20 hours on the stretch, they were engaged in the boats, steadily pulling or sailing or paddling after the whales, or for an interlude of 60 or 70 minutes, calmly awaiting their uprising, though with but small success for their pains. At such times, under an unabated sun, afloat all day upon smooth, slow-heaving swells, seated in his boat, light as a birch canoe, and so sociably mixing with the soft waves themselves, that like hearthstone cats they purr against the gunwale. These are the times of dreamy quietude, when beholding the tranquil beauty and brilliancy of the ocean's skin, one forgets the tiger heart that pants beneath it, and would not willingly remember that this velvet paw but conceals a remorseless fawn. These are the times when in his whaleboat the rover softly feels a certain filial confident land-like feeling towards the sea, that he regards it as so much flowery earth, and the distant ship, revealing only the tops of her masts, seems struggling forward not through high rolling waves, but through the tall grass of a rolling prairie, as when the western immigrants' horses only show their erected ears while their hidden bodies widely wade through the amazing virgin vales, the mild blue hillsides, as over these there steals the hush, the hum. You almost swear that play-weary children lie sleeping in these solitudes in some glad Maytime, when the flowers of the woods are plucked. And all this mixes with your most mystic mood, so that fact and fancy halfway meeting, interpenetrate, and form one seamless whole. Nor did such soothing scenes, however temporary, fail of at least as temporary an effect on Ahab. But if these secret golden keys did seem to open in him his own secret golden treasuries, yet did his breath upon them prove but tarnishing. O grassy glades! O ever vernal, endless landscapes in the soul! In ye, though long parched by the dead drought of the earthly life, in ye men yet may roll like young horses in new morning clover, and for some few fleeting moments feel the cool dew of the life immortal on them. Would to God these blessed calms would lassate, but the mingling threads of life are woven by warp and woof, calms crossed by storms, a storm for every calm. There is no steady, unretracing progress in this life. We do not advance through fixed gradations, and at the last one pause, through infancy's unconscious spell, boyhood's thoughtless faith, adolescence's doubt, the common doom, then skepticism, then disbelief, resting at last in manhood's pondering repose of if. But once gone through, we trace the round again, and our infants, boys, and men, and ifs eternally. Where lies the final harbor, whence we unearn no more? In what rapt ether sails the world, of which the weariest will never weary? Where is the foundling's father hidden? Our souls are like those orphans whose unwed mothers die in bearing them. The secret of our paternity lies in their grave, and we must dare to learn it. And that same day, too, gazing far down from his boat's side into that same golden sea, Starbucks lowly murmured, "Loveliness unfathomable, as ever lover saw in his young bride's eye, tell me not of thy teeths, and thy kidnapping cannibal ways. Let faith oust fact, let fancy oust memory. I look deep down and do believe." And Stubb, fish-like with sparkling scales, leaped up in that same golden light. I am Stubb, and Stubb has his history. But here, Stubb takes oaths that he has always been jolly. Chapter 115. The Peekquad meets the Bachelor. And jolly enough were these sights and sounds that came bearing down before the wind some few weeks after Ahab's harpoon had been welded in. It was a Nantucket ship, the Bachelor, which had just wedged in her last cask of oil and bolted down her bursting hatches, and now in glad holiday apparel, was joyously, though somewhat vaingloriously, sailing round among the widely separated ships on the ground. Previous to pointing her prow for home, the three men at her masthead wore long streamers of narrow red bunting at their hats. From the stern a whaleboat was suspended, bottom down, and hanging captive from the bowsprit was seen the long lower jaw of the last whale they had slain. Signals, ensigns, and jacks of all colors were flying from her rigging on every side. Sideways lashed in each of her 3 basket tops were 2 barrels of sperm, above which in her topmast cross trees you saw slender breakers of the same precious fluid. And nailed to her main truck was a brazen lamp. As was afterwards learned, the Bachelor had met with the most surprising success, all the more wonderful, for that while cruising in these same seas, numerous other vessels had gone entire months without securing a single fish. Not only had barrels of beef and bread been given away to make room for the far more valuable sperm, but additional supplemental casks had been bartered for from the ship she had met. And these were stowed along the deck and in the captain's and officers' stadiumis. Even the cabin table itself had been knocked into kindling wood. And the cabin mess dined off the broadhead of an oil, but lashed down to the floor for a centerpiece. In the folks, the sailors had actually cocked and pitched their chests and filled them. It was humorously added that the cook had clapped ahead on his largest boiler and filled it, that the steward had plugged his spare coffee pot and filled it, that the harpooners had headed the sockets of their iron and filled them, that indeed everything was filled with sperm except the captain's pantaloons pockets, and those he reserved to thrust his hands into in self-complacent testimony of his entire satisfaction. As this glad ship of good luck bore down upon the moody Peekquad, the barbarian sound of enormous drums came from her foul, and drawing still nearer, a crowd of her men were seen standing round her huge tripods, which covered with the parchment-like poke or stomach skin of the black fish, gave forth a loud roar to every stroke of the clenched hands of the crew. On the quarter-deck, the mates and harpooners were dancing with the olive-hued girls who had eloped with them from the Polynesian Isles, while suspended in an ornamented boat, firmly secured aloft between the foremast and the mainmast. 3 Long Island Negroes with glittering fiddle bows of whale ivory were presiding over the hilarious jig. Meanwhile, others of the ship's company were tumultuously busy at the masonry of the try-works from which the huge pots had been removed. Addition, you would have almost thought they were pulling down the cursed Bastille. Such wild cries they raised, as the now useless brick and mortar were being hurled into the sea. Lord and master over all this scene, the captain stood erect on the ship's elevated quarter-deck, so that the whole rejoicing drama was full before him, and seemed merely contrived for his own individual diversion. And Ahab, he too was standing on his quarter-deck, shaggy and black with a stubborn gloom. And as the 2 ships crossed each other's wakes, one all jubilations for things past, the other all forebodings as to things to come. Their 2 captains in themselves impersonated the whole striking contrast of the scene. "Come aboard! Come aboard!" cried the gay Bachelor's commander, lifting a glass and a bottle in the air. "Hast seen the white whale?" gritted Ahab in reply. "No, only heard of him, but don't believe in him at all," said the other good-humoredly. "Come aboard. Thou art too damn jolly. Sail on. Hast lost any men?" "Not enough to speak of. 2 islanders, that's all. But come aboard, old hearty. Come along. I'll soon take that black from your brow. Come along, will you? Mary's the play. A full ship and homeward bound." "How wondrous familiar is a fool," muttered Ahab, and then aloud, "Thou art a full ship and homeward bound. Thou say established well. Then call me an empty ship and outward bound. So go thy ways, and I will mine. Forward there, set all sail, and keep her to the wind." And thus, while the one ship went cheerily before the breeze, the others stubbornly fought against it. And so the 2 vessels parted, the crew of the Peekquad looking with grave, lingering glances toward the receding Bachelor, but the Bachelor's men never heeding their gaze for the lively revelry they were in. And as Ahab, leaning over the taffrail, eyed the homeward-bound craft, he took from his pocket a small vial of sand, and then looking from the ship to the vial, seemed thereby bringing 2 remote associations together. For that vial was filled with Nantucket soundings. Chapter 116. The Dying Whale. Not seldom in this life, when on the right side fortune's favorites sail close by us, we though all a droop before, catch somewhat of the rushing breeze, and joyfully feel our bagging sails fill out. So seemed it with the Peekquad, for next day, after encountering the gay Bachelor, whales were seen, and 4 were slain, and one of them by Ahab. It was far down the afternoon, and when all these spearings of the crimson fight were done, and floating in the lovely sunset sea and sky, sun and whale both stilly died together. Then such a sweetness and such plaintiveness, such enwreathing or curled up in that rosy air, that it almost seemed as if far over from the deep green convent valleys of the Manila Isles, the Spanish land breeze wantingly turned sailor had gone to sea. Fright with these vesper hymns, soothed again, but only soothed to deeper gloom. Ahab, who had sterned off from the whale, sat intently watching his final wanings from the now tranquil boat. For that strange spectacle observable in all sperm whales dying, the turning sunwards of the head and so expiring. That strange spectacle beheld of such a placid evening somehow, to Ahab, conveyed a wondrousness unknown before. He turns and turns him to it. How slowly, but how steadfastly his homage rendering and invoking brow with his last dying motions. He too worships fire, most faithful, broad perennial vassal of the sun. Oh, that these 2 favoring eyes should see these 2 favoring sights. Look here far waterlowed beyond all hum of human weal or woe in these most candid and impartial seas, where to traditions no rocks furnish tablets, where for long Chinese ages the billows have still rolled on speechless and unspoken to as stars that shine upon the Niger's unknown source. Here too life dies sunwards full of faith. But see, no sooner dead than death whirls round the corpse, and it heads some other way. Oh, thou dark Hindu half of nature, who of drowned bones hast builded thy separate throne somewhere in the heart of these unvaried seas. Thou art an infidel, thou queen, and too truly speakest to me in the wide slaughtering typhoon and the hushed burial of its after calm. Nor has this thy whale sunwards turned his dying head, and then gone round again without a lesson to me. Oh, trebly hooped and welded hip of power! O high aspiring rainbowed jet, that one strivest, this one jettest all in vain, O whale dost thou seek intercedings with yin all-quickening sun that only calls forth life, but gives it not again, yet dost thou darker hath rock me with a prouder if a darker faith, all thy unnameable imminglings float beneath me here, I am buoyed by breath deaths of once. Living things exhaled as air, but water now. Then hail forever hail, O sea, in whose eternal tossings the wild fowl finds his only are established born of earth, yet suckled by the sea. Though hill and valley mothered me, you billows are my foster brothers. Chapter 117. The Whale Watch. The 4 whales slain that evening had died wide apart, one far to windward, one less distant to leeward, one ahead, one astern. These last 3 were brought alongside ere nightfall. But the windward one could not be reached till morning, and the boat that had killed it lay by its side all night. And that boat was Ahab's. The wayful was thrust upright into the dead whale's spout hole, and the lantern hanging from its top cast a troubled, flickering glare upon the black glossy back, and far out upon the midnight waves, which gently chafed the whale's broad flank, like soft surf upon a beach. Ahab and all his boat's crew seemed asleep, but the Parsee, who crouching in the bow, sat watching the sharks that spectrally played round the whale and tapped the light's planks with their tails. A sound like the moaning in squadrons over asphalt heights of unforgiven ghosts of Gomorrah ran shuddering through the air. Startled from his slumbers, Ahab face to face saw the Parsee, and hooped round by the gloom of the night. They seemed the last men in a flooded world. I have dreamed it again, said he of the hears. Have I not said, old man, that neither hearse nor coffin can be thine? And who are hearse that die on the sea? But I said, Old man, that dare thou couldst die on this voyage, 2 hearses must verily be seen by thee on the sea. The first not made by mortal hands, and the visible wood of the last one must be grown in America. A strange sight that, Parsi, a hearse and its plumes floating over the ocean with the waves for the pallbearers. Huh, such a sight we shall not soon see. Believe it or not, thou canst not die till it be seen, old man. And what was that saying about thyself? Though it come to the last, I shall still go before thee, thy pilot. And when thou art so gone before, if that ever befall, then ere I can follow, thou must still appear to me to pilot me still. Was it not so? Well, then did I believe all you say, O my pilot? I have here 2 pledges that I shall yet slay Moby-Dick and survive it. Take another pledge, old man, said the Parsi as his eyes lighted up like fireflies in the gloom. Hemp only can kill thee. The gallows, you mean. I am immortal then, on land and on sea, cried Ahab with a laugh of derision. Immortal on land and on sea. Both were silent again as one man. The gray dawn came on, and the slumbering crew arose from the boat's bottom, and ere noon the dead whale was brought to the ship. Chapter 118 The Quadrant. The season for the line at length drew near, and every day when Ahab, coming from his cabin, cast his eyes aloft, the vigilant helmsman would ostentatiously handle his spokes, and the eager mariners quickly run to the braces, and would stand there with all their eyes centrally fixed on the nailed de-lune, impatient for the order to point the ship's prow for the equator. In good time the order came. It was hard upon high noon, and Ahab, seated in the bows of his high-hoisted boat, was about taking his wonted daily observation of the sun to determine his latitude. Now in that Japanese sea, the days in summer are as fresh of agencies. That unblinkingly vivid Japanese sun seems the blazing focus of the glassy ocean's immeasurable burning glass. The sky looks lacquered, clouds there are none. The horizon floats, and this nakedness of unreaved radiance is as the insufferable splendors of God's throne. Well, that Ahab's quadrant was furnished with colored glasses through which to take sight of that solar fire. So swinging his seated form to the roll of the ship, and with his astrological looking instrument placed to his eye, he remained in that posture for some moments to catch the precise instant when the sun should gain its precise meridian. Meantime, while his whole attention was absorbed, the Parsi was kneeling beneath him on that ship's deck, and with face thrown up like Ahab's, was eyeing the same sun with him. Only the lids of his eyes half hooded their orbs, and his wild face was subdued to an earthly passionlessness. At length the desired observation was taken, and with his pencil upon his ivory leg, Ahab soon calculated what his latitude must be at that precise instant. Then, falling into a moment's reverie, he again looked up towards the sun and murmured to himself, Thou Seamark, thou high and mighty pilot, thou tellest me truly where I am, but can thou cast the least hint where I shall be? Or canst thou tell where some other thing besides me is this moment living? Where is Moby-Dick? This instant thou must be eyeing him. These eyes of mine look into the very eye that is now beholding him. Aye, and into the eye that is even now equally beholding the objects on the unknown thither side of thee, thou sun. Then gazing at his quadrant and handling one after the other its numerous cabalistical contrivances, he pondered again and muttered, Foolish toy, baby's plaything of haughty admirals and commodores and captains. The world brags of thee, of thy cunning and might. But what after all can thou do but tell the poor pitiful point where thou thyself happens to be on this wide planet? And the hand that holds thee, no, not one jot more. Thou canst not tell where one drop of water or one grain of sand will be tomorrow noon. And yet with thy impotence thou insultest the sun. Science, curse thee, thou vain toy, and cursed be all the things that cast man's eyes aloft to that heaven, whose live vividness but scorches him, as these old eyes are even now scorched with thy light, O sun. Level by nature to this earth's horizon are the glances of man's eyes, not shot from the crown of his head, as if God had meant him to gaze on his firmament. Curse thee, thou quadrant, dashing it to the deck. No longer will I guide my earthly way by thee, the level ship's compass, and the level dead reckoning by log and by line. These shall conduct me, and show me my place on the sea, I lighting from the boat to the deck. Thus I trample on thee, thou polery thing that feebly pointest on high. Thus I split and destroy thee. As the frantic old man thus spoke and thus trampled with his live and dead feet, a sneering triumph that seemed meant for Ahab, and a fatalistic despair that seemed meant for himself. These passed over the mute, motionless Parsi's face. Unobserved, he rose and glided away. While struck by the aspect of their commander, the seamen clustered together on the folks, till Ahab, troubledly pacing the deck, shouted out, "To the braces, up helm, square in." In an instant the yard swung round, and as the ship half-W wheeled upon her heel, her three firm-seated graceful masts erectly poised upon her long-ribbed hull seemed as the three horati, pirouetting on one sufficient estiadation, standing between the knight-heads. Starbucks watched the Peekquad's tumultuous way, and Ahab's also as he went lurching along the deck. I have sat before dense coal fire and watched it all aglow, full of its tormented flaming life. And I have seen it wane at last down to dumbest dew saint. Old man of oceans, of all this fiery life of thine, what will at length remain but one little heap of ashes? I cried stub, but sea coal ashes. Mind you that, Mr. Starbucks. Sea coal, not your common charcoal. Well, well, I heard Ahab mutter here. Someone thrust these cards into these old hands of mine. Swears I must play them and no others. And damn me, Ahab, but thou act right. Live in the game and die in it. Chapter 119. The candles. Warmest climes, but nurse the krillest fangs. The tiger of Bengal crouches in spiced groves of ceaseless veer. Skies the most effulgent, but basket the deadliest thunders. Gorgeous Cuba knows tornadoes that never swept tame northern lands. So too is it that in these resplendent Japanese seas the mariner encounters the direst of all storms, the typhoon. It will sometimes burst out of that cloudless sky like an exploding bomb upon a dazed and sleepy town. Towards evening of that day, the Peekquad was torn of her canvas, and bare-poled was left to fight a typhoon which had struck her directly ahead. When darkness came on, sky and sea roared and split with the thunder and blazed with the lightning that showed the disabled mass fluttering here and there with the rags which the first fury of the tempest had left for its aftersport. Holding by a shroud, Starbucks was standing on the quarter-deck at every flash of the lightning, glancing aloft to see what additional disaster might have befallen the intricate hamper there, while Stubb and Flask were directing the men in the higher hoisting and firmer lashing of the boats. But all their pains seemed not. Though lifted to the very top of the cranes, the windward quarter-boat Ahab's did not escape. A great rolling sea, dashing high up against the reeling ship's high teetering side stove in the boat's bottom at the stern, and left it again all dripping through like a sieve. Bad work, Mr. Starbucks, said Stubb, regarding the wreck. But the sea will have its way. Stubb, for one, can't fight it. You see, Mr. Starbucks, a wave has such a great long start before it leaps. All around the world it runs, and then comes the spring. But as for me, all the start I have to meet it is just across the deck here. But never mind, it's all in fun. So the old song sings, oh, jolly is the gale, and a joker is the whale, a flourish in his tail. Such a funny, sporty, jesty, jokey, hokey-pokey lad is the ocean. The scuttle of flying, that's his flip-onleaf man when he stirs in the spicing. Such a funny, sporty, justicey, jokey, hokey-pokey lad is the ocean. Number Thunder splits the ship, but he only smacks his lips. A tasting of this flip. Such a funny, sporty, justicey, jokey, Hokey-pokey lad is the ocean. Oh, a vast stub, cried Starbucks. Let the typhoon sing and strike his harp here in our rigging. But if thou art a brave man, thou wilt hold thy peace. But I'm not a brave man. Never said I was a brave man. I am a coward, and I sing to keep up my spirits. And I'll tell you what it is, Mr. Starbucks. There's no way to stop my singing in this world, but to cut my throat. And when that's done, 10 to 1, I sing you the doxology for a wind-up. Madman, look through my eyes if thou hast none of thine own. What? How can you see better of a dark night than anybody else? Never mind how foolish. Here, cried Starbucks, seizing Stubb by the shoulder and pointing his hand towards the weather bow. Mark'st thou not that the gale comes from the eastward? The very course Ahab is to run from Moby-Dick, the very course he swung to this day noon. Now mark his boat there. Where's that stove? In the stern sheets, man, where he is one a stand. His standpoint is stove man. Now jump overboard and sing away if thou moose saint. I don't half understand ye. What's in the wind? Yes, yes. Round the Cape of Good Hope is the shortest way to Nantucket. Soliloquist Starbucks, suddenly heedless of Stubb's question. The gale that now hammers at us to save us. We can turn it into a fair wind that will drive us towards home. Yonder to windward is all blackness of doom. But to leeward homeward, I see it lightens up there, but not with the lightning. At that moment, in one of the intervals of profound darkness, following the flashes, a voice was heard at his side, and almost at the same instant a volley of thunder peals rolled overhead. Who's there? Old Thunder, said Ahab, groping his way along the bulwarks to his pivot hole, but suddenly finding his path made plain to him by elbowed lances of fire. Now, as the lightning rod to aspire on shore is intended to carry off the perilous fluid into the soil, so the kindred rod, which at sea some ships carry to each mast, is intended to conduct it into the water. But as this conductor must descend to considerable depth, that its end may avoid all contact with the hull, and as, moreover, if kept constantly towing there, it would be liable to many mishaps, besides interfering not a little with some of the rigging, and more or less impeding the vessel's way in the water. Because of all this, the lower parts of a ship's lightning rods are not always overboard, but are generally made in long, slender links, so as to be the more readily hauled up into the chains outside, or thrown down into the sea, as occasion may require. The rods, cried Starbucks to the crew, suddenly admonished vigilance by the vivid lightning that had just been darting flambeau to light Ahab to his passant. Are they overboard? Drop them over fore and aft quick. I've asked, cried Ahab. Let's have fair play here, though we be the weaker side. Yet I'll contribute to raise rods on the Himalayas and Andes that all the world may be secured but out on privileges. Let them be, sir. Look aloft, cried Starbucks. The corposants. All the yard arms were tipped with a pallet fire, and touched at each triumphant lightning rod end with 3 tapering white flames. Each of the 3 tall masts was silently burning in that sulphurous air, like 3 gigantic wax tapers before an altar. Last the boat. Let it go? Cried Stubb at this instant, as a swashing sea heaved up under his own little craft, so that its gunwale violently jammed his hand as he was passing a lashing. Blast it! But slipping backwards on the deck, his uplifted eyes caught the flames, and immediately shifting his tone, he cried, "The corpus ants, have mercy on us all. To sailors, oaths are household words. They will swear in the trance of the calm, and in the teeth of the tempest established. They will imprecate curses from the topsail yard arms, when most they teeter over to a sting sea. But in all my voyaging seldom have I heard a common oath when God's burning finger has been laid upon the ship, when his miniapars has been woven into the shrouds and the cordage." While this pallidness was burning aloft, few words were heard from the enchanted crew, who in one thick cluster stood on the folks, all their eyes gleaming in that pale phosphorescence like a faraway constellation of stars. Relieved against the ghostly light, The gigantic jet negro Dagu loomed up to thrice his real stature, and seemed the black cloud from which the thunder had come. The parted mouth of Tashtega revealed his shark-white teeth, which strangely gleamed as if they too had been tipped by corpusants. While lit up by the preternatural light, Kay's tattooing burned like satanic blue flames on his body. The tableau all waned at last with the pallidness aloft, and once more the Peekquad and every soul on her decks were wrapped in a paw. A moment or two passed when Starbucks going forward pushed against someone. It was Stubb. "What think thou now, man? I heard thy cry. It was not the same in the song." "No, it wasn't," I said. "The corpusants have mercy on us all, and I hope they will still. But do they only have mercy on long faces? Have they no bowels for a laugh? And look you, Mr. Starbucks, but it's too dark for a look. Hear me then. I take that masthead flame we saw for a sign of good luck. For those masts are rooted in a hold that is going to be chock-a-block with sperm oil. Do you see? And so all that sperm oil will work up into the mast like sap in a tree. Yes, our 3 masts will yet be as 3 spermaceti candles. That's the good promise we saw." At that moment, Starbucks caught sight of Stubbs' face slowly beginning to glimmer into sight. Glancing upwards, he cried, "See, see." And once more the high, tapering flames were beheld with what seemed redoubled supernaturalness in their power. "The corpusants, have mercy on us all," cried Stubb again. At the base of the main mast, full beneath the dloon and the flame, the Parsee was kneeling in Ahab's front, but with his head bowed away from him, while nearby, from the arched and overhanging rigging, where they had just been engaged in securing a spar, a number of the seamen, arrested by the glare, now cohered together, and hung pendulous like a knot of numbed wasps from a drooping orchard twig, in various enchanted attitudes, like the standing ing or stepping or running skeletons in Herculaneum. Others remained rooted to the deck, but all their eyes up Cassant. "Aye, man," cried Ahab. "Look up at it. Mark it well. The white flame but lights the way to the white whale. Hand me those mainmast links there. I would fain feel this pulse and let mine beat against it. Blood against fire." So then turning the last link held fast in his left hand, he put his foot upon the parse, and with fixed upward eye and high-flung right arm, he stood erect before the lofty triointed trinity of flames. "Oh, thou clear spirit of clear fire, whom on these seas I, as Persian once did worship, till in the sacramental act so burned by thee, that to this hour I bear the scar. I now know thee, thou clear spirit, and I now know that thy right worship is defiance. To neither love nor reverence wilt thou be kind. And even for hate thou canst but kill, and all our kill edition, no fearless fool now fronts thee. I own thy speechless, placeless power, but to the last gasp of my earthquake life will dispute its unconditional, unintegral mastery in me. In the midst of the personified impersonal, a personality stands here. Though but a point at best, whensoever I came, whensoever I go, yet while I earthly live, the queenly personality lives in me and feels her royal rights. But war is pain, and hate is woe. Come in thy lowest form of love, and I will kneel and kiss thee. But at thy highest come as mere supernal power. And though thou launchest navies of full-freighted worlds, there's that in here that still remains indifferent. O thou clear spirit of thy fire thou madest me, and like a true child of fire, I breathe it back to thee. Sudden repeated flashes of lightning. The 9 flames leap lengthwise to thrice their previous height. Ahab with the rest closes his eyes, his right hand pressed hard upon them. I own thy speechless, placeless power. Said I not so? Nor was it wrung from me, nor do I now drop these links. Thou canst blind, but I can then grope. Thou canst consume, but I can then be ashes. Take the homage of these poor eyes and shudder hands. I would not take it. The lightning flashes through my skull. Mine eyeballs ache and ache. My whole beaten brain seems as beheaded and rolling on some stunning ground. Oh, yet blindfold, yet will I talk to thee. Light though thou be, thou leapest out of darkness. But I am darkness leaping out of light. Leaping out of thee, the javelins cease. Open eyes, see or not, there burn the flames. O thou magnanimous, now I do glory in my genealogy. But thou art but my fiery father. My sweet mother I know not. O cruel, what hast thou done with her? There lies my puzzle, but thine is greater. Thou knowest not how came ye. Hence callest thyself unbegotten. Certainly knowest not thy beginning. Hence callest thyself unbegotten. I know that of me, which thou knowest not of thyself, O thou omnipotent. There is some unsuffing thing beyond thee, thou clear spirit, to whom all thy eternity is but time, all thy creativeness mechanical. Through thee, thy flaming self, my scorched eyes do dimly see it. O thou foundling fire, thou hermit immemorial. Thou too hast thy incommunicable riddle, thy unparticipated grief. Here again with haughty agony I read my sire. Leap, leap up and lick the sky. I leap with thee, I burn with thee, would fain be welded with thee. Defyingly I worship thee. The boat, cried Starbuck. Look at thy boat, old man. Ahab's harpoon, the one forged at Perth's fire, remained firmly lashed in its conspicuous crotch, so that it projected beyond his whaleboat's bow. But the sea that had stove its bottom had caused the loose leather sheath to drop off, and from the keen steel barb there now came a leveled flame of pale, forked fire. As the silent harpoon burned there like a serpent's tongue, Starbucks grasped Ahab by the Arum god. God is against the old man. Forbear, it is an ill voyage, ill begun, ill continuation. Let me square the yards while we may, old man, and make a fair wind of it homewards, to go on a better voyage than this. Overhearing Starbucks, the panic-stricken crew instantly ran to the braces. Though not a sail was left aloft for the moment, all the aghast mates' thoughts seemed theirs. They raised a half-mutinous cry, but dashing the rattling lightning links to the deck, and snatching the burning harpoon, Ahab waved it like a torch among them, swearing to transfix with it the first sailor that but cast loose a rope's end. Petrified by his aspect, and still more shrinking from the fiery dart that he held, the men fell back in dismay, and Ahab again spoke. All your oaths to hunt the white whale are as binding as mine, and heart, soul, and body, lungs, and life, old Ahab, is bound. And that you may know to what tune this heart beats, look you here. Thus I blow out the last fear. And with one blast of his breath he extinguished the flame. As in the hurricane that sweeps the plain, men fly the neighborhood of some lone gigantic elm, whose very height and strength but render it so much the more unsafe, because so much the more a mark for thunderbolts. So at those last words of Ahab's, many of the mariners did run from him in a terror of dismay. Chapter 120. The deck towards the end of the first night watch. Ahab standing by the helm. Starbucks approaching him. We must send down the main topsail yard, sir. The band is working loose, and the lee lift is half-stranded. Shall I strike it, sir? Strike nothing. Lash it. If I had skysail poles, I'd sway them up now, sir. In God's name, sir. Well, the anchors are working, sir. Shall I get them inboard? Strike nothing and stir nothing, but lash everything. The wind rises, but it has not got up to my table lands yet. Quick and see to it. By masts and keels. He takes me for the hunchbacked skipper of some coasting smack. Send down my main topsail yard. Huh. Blue pots. Loftiest trucks were made for wildest winds. And this brain truck of mine now sails amid the cloud scud. Shall I strike that? Oh, none but cowards send down their brain trucks in tempest time. What a hurushaw off there. I would even take it for sublime. Did I not know that the colic is a noisy malady? Oh, take medicine. Take medicine. Chapter 121. Midnight. The folks' bulwarks. Stub and flask mounted on them, and passing additional lashings over the anchors they're hanging. No, Stub. You may pound that knot there as much as you please, but you will never pound into me what you were just now saying. And how long ago is it since you said the very contrary? Didn't you once say that whatever ship Ahab sails in, that ship should pay something extra on its insurance policy, just as though it were loaded with powder barrels aft and boxes of lucifers forward? Stop now. Didn't you say so? Well, suppose I did. What then? I've part changed my flesh since that time. Why not my mind? Besides, supposing we are loaded with powder barrels aft and lucifers forward, how the devil should the lucifers get a fire in this drenching spray here? Why, my little man, you have pretty red hair, but you couldn't get a fire now. Shake yourself. Your Aquarius or the water barrier flask might fill pictures at your coat collar. Don't you see then that for these extra risks the marine insurance companies have extra guarantees? Here are hydrants, flask. But hark again, and I'll answer you the other thing. First take your leg off from the crown of the anchor here, though, so I can pass the rope. Now listen. What's the mighty difference between holding a mast lightning rod in the storm and standing close by a mast that hasn't got any lightning rod at all in a storm? Don't you see, you timberhead, that no harm can come to the holder of the rod, unless the mast is first struck? What are you talking about then? Not one ship in 100 carries rods, and Ahab, I, man, and all of us were in no more danger then, in my poor opinion, than all the crews in 10,000 ships now sailing the seas. Why, you King Post, you, I suppose, would have every man in the world go about with a small lightning rod running up the corner of his hat, like a militia officer's skewered feather, and trailing behind like a sash. Why don't you be sensible, Flask? It's easy to be sensible. Why don't you then? Any man with half an eye can be sensible. I don't know that, Stub. You sometimes find it rather hard. Yes, when a fellow's soaked through, it's hard to be sensible. That's a fact. And I am about drenched with this spray. Never mind. Catch the turn there and pass. It seems to me we are lashing down these anchors now as if they were never going to be used again. Tying these 2 anchors here at La Sainte seems like tying a man's hands behind him. And what big, generous hands they are, to be sure. These are your iron fists, eh? What a hold they have, too. I wonder, Flask, whether the world is anchored anywhere. If she is, she swings with an uncommon long cable, though. There, hammer that knot down and we're done. So, next to touching land, lighting on deck is most satisfactory, I say. Just wring out my jacket skirts, will you? Thank you. They laugh at long toss so fast, but it seems to me a long-tailed coat ought always to be worn in storms afloat. The tails tapering down that way serve to carry off the water, do you see? Same with cocked hats. The form gable and eave troughs flasks. No more monkey jackets and tarpaulins for me. I must mount a swallowtail and drive down a beaver. So hello, there goes my tarpaulin overboard. Lord, Lord, that the winds that come from heaven should be so unmannerly. This is a nasty night, lad. Chapter 122. Midnight Aloft. Thunder and lightning. The main topsail yard. Tashago passing new lashings around it. Stop that thunder. Plenty too much thunder up here. What's the use of thunder? We don't want thunder. We want rum. Give us a glass of rum. Chapter 123. The musket. During the most violent shocks of the typhoon, the man at the Peekquad's jawbone tiller had several times been reelingly hurled to the deck by its spasmodic motions. Even though preventer tackles had been attached to it, for they were slack, because some play to the tiller was indispensable. In a severe gale like this, while the ship is but a tossed shuttlecock to the blast, it is by no means uncommon to see the needles and the compasses at intervals go round and round. It was thus with the Peekquads. At almost every shock, the helmsman had not failed to notice the whirling velocity with which they revolved upon the cards. It is a sight that hardly anyone can behold without some sort of unwanted emotion. Some hours after midnight, the typhoon abode so much that through the strenuous exertions of Starbucks and Stubb, one engaged forward and the other aft, the shivered remnants of the jib and fore and main topsails were cut adrift from the spars and went eddying away to leeward like the feathers of an albatross, which sometimes are cast to the winds when that storm-tossed bird is on the wing. The 3 corresponding new sails were now bent and reefed, and a storm tail was set further aft, so that the ship soon went through the water with some precision again. And the course for the present east-southeast, which he was to steer, if practicable, was once more given to the helmsman. For during the violence of the gale he had only steered according to its vicissitudes. But as he was now bringing the ship as near her course as possible, watching the compass needle meanwhile, lo, a good sign, the wind seemed coming round astern. The foul breeze became fair. Instantly the yards were squared to the lively song of Ho the fair wind. O ye ho cheerily men, the crew singing for joy, that so promising an event should so soon have falsified the evil portents preceding it. In compliance with the standing order of his commander to report immediately, and at any one of the 24 hours, any decided change in the affairs of the deck, Starbucks had no sooner trimmed the yards to the breeze, however reluctantly and gloomily, than he mechanically went below to apprise Captain Ahab of the circumstance. Ere knocking at his stateroom door, he involuntarily paused before it a moment. The cabin lamp, taking long swings this way and that, was burning fitfully and casting fitful shadows upon the old man's bolted door, a thin one, with fixed blinds inserted in place of upper panels. The isolated subterraneousness of the cabin made a certain humming silence to reign there, though it was hooped round by all the roar of the elements. The loaded muskets in the rack were shiningly revealed as they stood upright against the forward bulkhead. Starbucks was an honest, upright man, but out of Starbuck's heart at that instant when he saw the muskets, there strangely evolved an evil thought, but so blunt with its neutral or good accompaniment that for the instant he hardly knew it for itself. He would have shot me once, he murmured. Yes, there's the very musket that he pointed at me, that one with the studded stock. Let me touch it, lift it. Strange that I who have handled so many deadly lances. Strange that I should shake so now. Load addition I must see. And powder in the pan. That's not good. Best spill it. Wait. I'll cure myself of this. I'll hold the musket boldly while I think. I come to report a fair wind to him. But how fair? Fair for death and doom. That's fair for Moby-Dick. It's a fair wind that's only fair for that ours fish. The very tube he pointed at me. The very one. This one I hold it here. He would have killed me with the very thing I handle now. And he would fain kill all his crew. Does he not say that he will not strike his spars to any gale? Has he not dashed his heavenly quadrant? And in these same perilous seas gropes he not his way by mere dead reckoning of the error-abounding log? And in this very typhoon did he not swear that he would have no lightning rods? But shall this crazed old man be tamely suffered to drag a whole ship's company down to doom with him? Yes, it would make him the willful murderer of 30 men and more. If this ship come to any deadly harm, and come to deadly harm, my soul swears this ship will, if Ahab have his way. If then he were this instant put aside, that crime would not be his. Is he muttering in his sleep? Yes, just there. In there, he's sleeping. Sleeping but still alive, and soon awake again. I can't withstand the old man. Not reasoning, not remonstrance, not entreaty wilt thou hearken to. All this thou scorn established flat obedience to thy own flat commands. This is all thou breath established and sayest the men have vowed thy vow. Sayest all of us are Ahabs. Great God forbid. But is there no other way? No lawful way. Make him a prisoner to be taken home. What? Hope to wrest this old man's living power from his own living hands. Only a fool would try it. Say he were pinioned, even knotted all over with ropes and horrors, chained down to ring bolts on his cabin floor. He would be more hideous than a caged tiger. Then I could not endure the sight, could not possibly fly his howlings. All comfort, sleep itself, inestimable reason would leave me on the long, intolerable voyage. What then remains? The land is hundreds of leagues away, and locked Japan the near established. I stand alone here upon an open sea with 2 oceans and a whole continent between me and law. I so is heaven a murderer when its lightning strikes a would-be murderer in his bed, tindering sheets and skin together? And would I be a murderer then if, and slowly, stealthily, and half sideways looking, he placed the loaded musket's end against the door? On this level, Ahab's hammock swings within, his head this way. A touch in Starbucks may survive to hug his wife and child again. Oh, Mary, Mary, boy, boy, boy. But if I wake thee not to death, old man, who can tell to what unsound deep Starbucks body this day weak may sink with all the crew? Great God, where art thou? Shall I? The wind has gone down and shifted, sir. The fore and main topsails are reefed and set. She heads her course. Stern all. O Moby-Dick, I clutch thy heart at La Sainte. Such were the sounds that now came hurtling from out the old man's tormented sleep, as if Starbuck's voice had caused a long, dumb dream to speak. The yet-lulled musket shook like a drunkard's arm against the panel. Starbucks seemed wrestling with an angel, but turning from the door, he placed the death tube in its rack and left the place. He is too sound asleep, Mr. Stubb. Go thou down and wake him, and tell him I must see to the deck here. Thou knowest what to say. Chapter 124. The Needle. Next morning the not yet subsided sea rolled in long, slow billows of mighty bulk, and striving in the Peekquad's gurgling track, pushed her on like giants' palms outspread. The strong, unstaggering breeze abounded so that sky and air seemed vast outbellying sails. The whole world boomed before the wind. Muffled in the full morning light, the invisible sun was only known by the spread intensity of his place, where his bayonet rays moved on in stacks. Emblazonings as of crowned Babylonian kings and queens reigned over everything. The sea was as a crucible of molten gold that bubblingly leaps with light and heat. Long maintaining an enchanted silence, Ahab stood apart, and every time the teetering ship loweringly pitched down her bowsprit, he turned to eye the bright sun's rays produced ahead. And when she profoundly settled by the stern, he turned behind and saw the sun's rearward place, and how the same yellow rays were blending with his undeviating wake. My ship, thou might as well be taken now for the sea chariot of the sun. Ho, all ye nations before my prow. I bring the sun to you. Yoke on the further billows. Hello, a tandem, I drive the sea. But suddenly reined back by some counterrod, he hurried towards the helm, huskily demanding how the ship was heading. East, so east, sir, said the frightened steersman. Thou least, smiting him with his clenched fist, heading east at this hour in the morning, and the sun astern. Upon this every soul was confounded, for the phenomenon just then observed by Ahab had unaccountably escaped everyone else, but its very blinding palpableness must have been the cause. Thrusting his head halfway into the binnacle, Ahab caught one glimpse of the compasses. His uplifted arm slowly fell. For a moment, he almost seemed to stagger. Standing behind him, Starbucks looked, and lo, the two compasses pointed east, and the Peekquad was as infallibly going W established. But ere the first wild alarm could get out abroad among the crew, the old man, with a rigid laugh, exclaimed, I have it. It has happened before, Mr. Starbucks. Last night's thunder turned our compasses, that's all. Thou hast before now heard of such a thing, I take it. Aye, but never before has it happened to me, sir, said the pale mate gloomily. Here it must needs be said that accidents like this have in more than one case occurred to ships in violent stormists. The magnetic energy, as developed in the mariner's needle, is, as all know, essentially one with the electricity beheld in heaven. Hence, it is not to be much marveled at that such things should be instances where the lightning has actually struck the vessel so as to smite down some of these spars and rigging. The effect upon the needle has at times been still more fatal, all its lodestone virtue being annihilated, so that the before magnetic steel was of no more use than an old wife's knitting needle. But in either case, the needle never again of itself recovers the original virtue, thus marred or low saint. And if the binnacle compasses be affected, The same fate reaches all the others that may be in the ship, even were the lowermost one inserted into the kelson. Deliberately standing before the binnacle and eyeing the trans-pointed compasses, the old man, with the sharp of his extended hand, now took the precise bearing of the sun, and satisfied that the needles were exactly inverted, shouted out his orders for the ship's course to be changed accordingly. The yards were hard up, and once more the Peekquad thrust her undaunted bows into the opposing wind, for this supposed fair one had only been juggling her. Meanwhile, whatever were his own secret thoughts, Starbucks said nothing, but quietly he issued all requisite orders, while Stubb and Flask, who in some small degree seemed then to be sharing his feelings, likewise unmurringly acquiesced. As for the men, though some of them lowly rumbled, their fear of Ahab was greater than their fear of fate. But as ever before, the pagan harpooners remained almost wholly unimpressed, or if impressed, it was only with a certain magnetism shot into their congenial hearts from inflexible Ahab's. For a space the old man walked the deck in rolling rearies, but chancing to slip with his ivory heel, he saw the crushed copper sight tubes of the Quadrant he had the day before dashed to the deck. Thou poor proud heaven-gazer and sun's pilot! Yesterday I wrecked thee, and today the compasses would fain have wrecked me. So but Ahab is lorded over the level lodestone yet. Mr. Starbucks a lance without a pole atop maul and the smallest of the sail-maker's needles. Quick. Accessory perhaps to the impulse dictating the thing he was now about to do were certain prudential motives whose object might have been to revive the spirits of his crew by a stroke of his subtle skill in a matter so wondrous as that of the inverted compasses. Besides, the old man well knew that to steer by trans-pointed needles, though clumsily practicable, was not a thing to be passed over by superstitious sailors without some shudderings and evil portents. Men, said he, steadily turning upon the crew, as the mate handed him the things he had demanded. My men, the thunder turned old Ahab's needles. But out of this bit of steel, Ahab can make one of his own that will point as true as any. Abashed glances of servile wonder were exchanged by the sailors as this was said, and with fascinated eyes they awaited whatever magic might follow. But Starbucks looked away. With a blow from the top-maul, Ahab knocked off the steel head of the lance, and then, handing to the mate the long iron rod remaining, bade him hold it upright without it touching the deck. Then, with the maul, after repeatedly smiting the upper end of this iron rod, he placed the blunted needle endwise on top of it, and less strongly hammered that several times, the mate still holding the rod as before. Then going through some small, strange motions with it, whether indispensable to the magnetizing of the steel or merely intended to augment the awe of the crew, is uncertain, he called for linen thread, and moving to the binnacle, slipped out the two reverse needles there, and horizontally suspended the sail needle by its middle over one of the compass cards. At first the steel went round and round, quivering and vibrating at either end, but at last it settled to its place, when Ahab, who had been intently watching for this result, stepped frankly back from the binnacle, and pointing his stretched arm towards it, exclaimed, "Look you for yourselves, if Ahab be not lord of the level lodestone. The sun is east, and that compass swears it." One after another they peered in, for nothing but their own eyes could persuade such ignorance as theirs, and one after another they slunk away. In his fiery eyes of scorn and triumph, you then saw Ahab in all his fatal pride. Chapter 125. The Log and Line. While now the fated Peekquad had been so long afloat this voyage, the log and line had but very seldom been in use, owing to a confident reliance on other means of determining the vessel's place. Some merchantmen and many whalemen, especially when cruising, wholly neglect to heave the log, though at the same time, and frequently more for form's sake than anything else, regularly putting down upon the customary slate the course steered by the ship, as well as the presumed average rate of progression every hour. It had thus been with the Peekquad. The wooden reel, an angular log attached, hung long untouched just beneath the railing of the after bulwarks. Rains and spray had damped it. Sun and wind had warped it. All the elements had combined to rot a thing that hung so idly. But heedless of all this, his mood seized Ahab, as he happened to glance upon the reel, not many hours after the magnet scene. And he remembered how his quadrant was no more, and recalled his frantic oath about the level log and line. The ship was sailing plungingly. Astern the billows rolled in riots. Forward there, heaved the log. 2 seamen came, the golden-hued Tahitian and the grisly man's men. Take the reel, one of you. I'll he avenue. They went towards the extreme stern on the ship's loose side, where the deck, with the oblique energy of the wind, was now almost dipping into the creamy sidelong rushing sea. The man's man took the reel, and holding it high up by the projecting handle ends of the spindle round which the spool of line revolved, so stood with the angular log hanging downwards, till Ahab advanced to him. Ahab stood before him, and was lightly unwinding some 30 or 40 turns to form a preliminary hand coil to toss overboard, when the old man's man, who was intently eyeing both him and the line, made bold to speak. "Sir, I mistrust it. This line looks far gone. Long heat, and what have spoiled it? It will hold, old gentleman. Long heat and wet. Have they spoiled thee? Thou seemst to hold, or truer perhaps, life holds thee, not thou it. I hold the spool, sir. But just as my captain says, with these gray hairs of mine is not worthwhile disputing, especially with a superior who will never confess. What's that? There now is a patch professor in Queen Nature's granite-founded college, but methinks he's too subservient. Where thou born? In the little rocky Isle of Man, sir. Excellent. Thou'st hit the world by that. I know not, sir, but I was born there. In the Isle of Man. Hey, well, the other way it's good. Here's a man from man. A man born and once independent man, and now unmanned of man, which is sucked in by what? Up with the reel. The dead blind wall butts all inquiring heads at Lassane up with it. So the log was heave addition, the loose coils rapidly straightened out in a long dragging line astern. And then instantly the reel began to whirl in turns jerkingly raised and lowered by the rolling billows. The towing resistance of the log caused the old reel man to stagger strangely. Hold hard. Snap. The overstrained line sagged down in one long foon. The tugging log was gone. I crushed the quadrant. The thunder turns the needles. And now the mad sea parts the log line, but Ahab can mend all. Haul in there, Tahitian, reel up, make. And look ye, let the carpenter make another log, and mend thou the line. See to it. There he goes now. To him nothing's happened, but to me the skewer seems loosening out of the middle of the world. All in Tahitian. These lines run whole and whirling out. Come in broken and dragging slow. Ha! Pip, come to help. Pip. Pip, whom call you Pip? Pip jumped from the whaleboat. Pip's missing. Let's see now if you haven't fished him up here, fisherman. It drags hard. I guess he's holding on. Jerk him, Tahiti. Jerk him off. We haul and no cowards here. Oh, there's his arm just breaking water. A hatchet. A hatchet. Cut it off. We haul and no cowards here. Captain Ahab. Sir. Here's Pip trying to get on board again. Peace, thou crazy loon, cried the man's man, seizing him by the A-room away from the quarter deck. The greater idiot ever scolds the lesser, muttered Ahab, advancing. Hands off from that holiness. Where sayest thou Pip was, boy? Astern there, sir. Astern. Low. And who art thou, boy? I see not my reflection in the vacant pupils of thy eyes. O God, that man should be a thing for immortal souls to siv through. Who art thou, boy? Well, boy, sir. Ship's crier. Ding dong ding. Pip pipage 100 lb of clay reward for pipage 5 feet high. Looks cowardly. Quickest known by that. Ding dong ding. Who's seen Pip the coward? There can be no hearts above the snow line. Oh, you frozen heavens. Look down here. Ye did beget this luckless child, and have abandoned him. You creative libertines. Here, boy. Ahab's cabin shall be Pips's home henceforth, while Ahab lives. Thou touchest my innermost centre, boy. Thou art tied to me by cords woven of my heartstrings. Come, let's down. What's this? Here's velvet shark skin. Intently, gazing at Ahab's hand and feeling it. Ah, now had poor Pip but felt so kind a thing as this. Perhaps he had never been low saint, this seems to me, sir, as a man rope, something that weak souls may hold by. Oh, sir, let old Perth now come and rivet these two hands together, the black one with the white, for I will not let this go. Oh, boy, nor will I thee, unless I should thereby drag thee to worse horrors than are here. Come then to my cabin. Lo, you believers in God's all goodness and in man all ill. Lo, you see the omniscient God's oblivious of suffering man. And man, though idiotic and knowing not what he does, yet full of the sweet things of love and gratitude. Come, I feel prouder leading thee by thy black hand than though I had grasped an emperor's. There go two daft ones now, muttered the old man's man. One daft with strength, the other daft with weakness. But here's the end of the rotten line, all dripping, too. Mend it, eh? I think we best have a new line altogether. I'll see Mr. Stubb about it. Chapter 126. The Life Buoy. Steering now southeastward by Ahab's leveled steel, and her progress solely determined by Ahab's level log and line. The Peekquad held on her path towards the equator, making so long a passage through such unfrequented waters, describing no ships, and erelong sideways impelled by unvarying trade winds over waves monotonously mild. All these seemed the strange calm things preluding some riotous and desperate scene. At last, when the ship drew near to the outskirts, as it were, of the equatorial fishing ground, and in the deep darkness that goes before the dawn, was sailing by a cluster of rocky islets. The watch, then headed by Flask, was startled by a cry so plaintively wild and unnearly, like half-articulated wailings of the ghosts of all Herod's murdered innocents, that one and all they started from their reveries, and for the space of some moments stood, or sat, or leaned, all transfixedly listening like the carved Roman slave, while that wild cry remained within hearing. The Christian or civilized part of the crew said it was mermaids and shuddered, but the pagan Hopiners remained unapologetian. Yet the gay man's men, the oldest mariner of all, declared that the wild, thrilling sounds that were heard were the voices of newly drowned men in the sea. Below, in his hammock, Ahab did not hear of this till gray dawn, when he came to the deck. It was then recounted to him, by Flask, not unaccompanied with hinted, dark meanings. He hollowly laughed, and thus explained the wonder. Those rocky islands the ship had passed were the resort of great numbers of seals, and some young seals that had lost their dams, or some dams that had lost their cubs, must have risen nigh the ship and kept company with her, crying and sobbing with their human sort of wail. But this only the more affected some of them, because most mariners cherish a very superstitious feeling about seals, arising not only from their peculiar tones when in distress, but also from the human look of their round heads and semi-intelligent faces, seen peeringly uprising from the water alongside. In the sea, under certain circumstances, seals have more than once been mistaken for men. But the boys of the crew were destined to receive a most plausible confirmation in the fate of one of their number that morning. At sunrise this man went from his hammock to the masthead at the fore, and whether it was that he had not yet half sailors sometimes go aloft in a transition state, whether it was thus with the man, there is now no telling. But be that as it may, he had not been long at his perch when a cry was heard, a cry and a rushing, and looking up they saw a falling phantom in the air, and looking down, a little tossed heap of white bubbles in the blue of the sea. The life buoy, a long, slender cask, was dropped from the stern, where it always hung obedient to a cunning spring, but no hand rose to seize it. And the sun having long beat upon this cask, it had shrunken so that it slowly filled, and that parched wood also filled at its every pore. And the studded iron-bound cask followed the sailor to the bottom, as if to yield him his pillow, though in sooth but a hard one. And thus the first man of the Peekquad that mounted the mast to look out for the white whale on the white whale's own peculiar ground. That man was swallowed up in the deep, but few perhaps thought of that at the time. Indeed, in some sort they were not grieved at this event, at least as important, for they regarded it not as a foreshadowing of evil in the future, but as the fulfillment of an evil already pre-conditioned. They declared that now they knew the reason of those wild shrieks they had heard the night before. But again the old man's men said nay. The lost life boy was now to be re-Plaquedition Starbucks was directed to see to it, but as no cask of sufficient lightness could be found, and as in the feverish eagerness of what seemed the approaching crisis of the voyage, all hands were impatient of any toil but what was directly connected with its final end, whatever that might prove to be. Therefore, they were going to leave the ship's stern unprovided with a boy, when by certain strange signs and innuendos, quiqu hinted a hint concerning his coffin. "A life boy of a coffin," cried Starbucks, starting. "Rather queer, that I should say," said Stubb. "It'll make a good enough one," said Flask. "The carpenter here can arrange it easily." "Bring it up. There's nothing else for it," said Starbucks, after a melancholy pause. "Rig it, carpenter. Do not look at me. So the coffin, I mean. Dost thou hear me? Rig it. And shall I nail down the lid, sir?" Moving his hand as with a hammer. "Aye, and shall I the seam, sir?" Moving his hand as with a cocking iron. "Aye, and shall I then pay over the same with pitch, sir?" Moving his hand as with a pitch pot away. "What possesses thee to this? Make a life boy of the coffin, and no more. Mr. Stubb, Mr. Flask, come forward with me." Off he goes in a huff. The whole he can endure at the parts he bs. Now I don't like this. I make a leg for Captain Ahab, and he wears it like a gentleman. But I make a bandbox for quiqu, and he won't put his head into it. Or all my pains to go for nothing with that coffin. And now I'm ordered to make a life boy of it. It's like turning an old coat, going to bring the flesh on the other side. Now I don't like this cobbling sort of business. I don't like it at all. It's undignified, and it's not my place. Let tinkers' brats do tinkerings. We are their betters. I like to take in hand none but clean, virgin, fair, and square mathematical jobs. Something that regularly begins at the beginning and is at the middle when midway and comes to an end at the conclusion. Not a cobbler's job that's at an end in the middle and at the beginning at the end. It's the old woman's tricks to be giving cobbling jobs. Lord, what an affection all women have for tinkers. I know an old woman of 65 who ran away with a bald-headed young tinker once. And that's the reason I never would work for lonely widow old women ashore when I kept my job shop in the vineyards. They might have taken it into their lonely old heads to run off with me. But hi-ho, there are no caps at sea but snow caps. Let me see. Nail down the lid. The seam is pay over the same with pitch. Batten them down tight. And hang it with the snap spring over the ship's stern. Were ever such things done before with a coffin? Some superstitious old carpenters now would be tied up in the rigging, ere they would do the job. But I'm made of naughty era hemlock. I don't budge. Crumpered with a coffin, sailing about with a graveyard tray. But never mind. We workers in woods make bridal bedsteads and card tables, as well as coffins and hearses. We work by the month, or by the job, or by the profit. Not for us to ask the why and wherefore of our work, unless it be too confounded cobbling. Then we stash it if we can. I'll do the job now tenderly. I'll have me, let's see, how many in the ship's company, all told, but I've forgotten. Anyway, I'll have me 30 separate Turks-headed lifelines, each 3 feet long, hanging all around the coffin. Then, if the hull go down, there'll be 30 lively fellows all fighting for one coffin. A sight not seen very often beneath the sun. Come hammer, cocking iron, pitch pot, and marling spike. Let's to it.